Welcome back, everyone. In our last lesson, we explored how to properly collect data using sampling techniques that we learned. We talked about simple random, stratified, clustered, and of course, some other sampling techniques. And this helped us understand how to choose a good sample that will truly represent a population. But collecting a good sample is just the first step. Once we have the data, we have to carefully plan how we're going to use it. This means choosing the right kind of study design, identifying which variables we're interested in, and putting safeguards in place to avoid bias. So today's lesson is going to focus on some important ideas. First one is types of studies that we can conduct. The roles that different variables play, and then how we control for bias using grouping and blinding. So let's start by looking at the types of studies. So the types of studies we're going to talk about in this class, we have observational study, case control study, experimental studies, and clinical trials. Let's look at observational studies first. Observational study observes and records behavior without influencing the behavior. So, when we're using an observational study, we watch what's already happening without interfering or trying to change anything. That's why it's called an observational study. We're literally just observing. Okay, the next one is case control study. This compares individuals with a condition that's broken up into cases to those without controls to look back at past exposures. So basically, we look back at what happened by comparing people with a condition and those without a condition. So a case control study is basically an observational study where we observe, but we're looking at different groups for comparison. An experimental study, researchers assign treatments and observe the outcomes. So experimental and observational are very different in that sense, where observational, you're not trying to influence any changes. With an experimental study, you're trying to apply treatments and see what happens as a result. So you are directly trying to influence outcomes. For a clinical trial, that's a type of experimental study focused on evaluating medical treatments. So a clinical trial is basically a specific type of experimental study used in medical settings to test new treatments and procedures. All right, let's look at example 1. Doctors test a new cancer drug by assigning it to one group of patients and giving the standard drug to the other group. Both groups are monitored for side effects and survival rates. What type of study is this? Now, because this is a medical study that involves assigning treatments, it's being monitored for outcomes, and since it's in the medical context and we're actually applying some kind of treatment, this is going to be a clinical trial. It's an experimental study, but specifically in the medical field. So for this one, the answer we would choose would be D, clinical trial. Next, we're going to look at a study that doesn't involve assigning treatment, but does compare two groups based on a past condition. Looking at example 2, we have researchers compare patients with and without migraines by reviewing their past exposure to screen time. What type of study is this? This is definitely going to be some kind of observational study because there's no treatment applied. However, this study compares people who have had migraines and who have not. So we're making a comparison between groups. So this is going to be a case control study. Now let's shift to a situation where researchers actively assign a treatment to participants, but it's not in a medical setting. So looking at example 3, a company randomly assigns participants to receive a new vitamin supplement or a placebo and then tracks energy levels over 4 weeks. What type of study is this? This is clearly an experimental study because researchers are assigning treatments and tracking outcomes, and they're trying to influence the results. It's not just observing or comparing groups. But because this isn't in a medical setting at a hospital or a medical research center, this is just a company trying to gather some information. This is not considered a clinical trial. So our final answer for this would be an experimental study. Okay, looking at example 4, we have researchers survey people about their weekly exercise habits and compare it with resting heart rates. What type of study is this? Now, this is a situation where no one is being told what to do. There's no groups that are separated. There's no treatment being applied. The researchers are just trying to record what people are already doing. So this is a very simple and classic case of observational study.